Two completely different classes of knives, but like I said, a lot of people have asked me to do reviews comparing the Victorinox to the higher end knives so they can make a decision. So that's what I'm doing. Shun Premier versus Victorinox Fibrox, both 8-inch chef's knives. And off the bat, you can tell this is definitely a Premier knife, whereas that is a more workhorse type of knife. Let's talk about the similarities. Two similarities between these knives. Number one, they have similar cutting angles, 16 degrees and 15 degrees. And number two, they both have lifetime warranties. Now we have a whole list of differences. Number one, forged knife, stamped knife. Number two, handmade, machine made. Number three, this uses VG10 steel, which is the gold standard of steels. This does not, and the end result is this has a 58 hardness, that has a 61 hardness approximately. That means two things. Number one, it means that this is much more resilient to chipping because as you use it, it's so hard that it doesn't get bent and morphed. But number two, the opposite side of that coin is that since it doesn't get bent and morphed, any energy needs to somehow be dissipated. So if you're very, very harsh with these knives, if you don't use them properly, they are more prone to chipping. A lot of people in different forms complain about that. I think that's a moot point because if you're using a knife properly, it shouldn't be chipping in the first place. The next difference is that while this uses VG10 steel, since this is stamped and machine made, that's all this uses is a random steel that has a 58 hardness. This, however, is VG10 steel that then has 32 layers of essentially stainless steel wrapped around it and folded over it, which leads to a couple of things. Number one, you get this gorgeous Damascus pattern on that bottom half of the knife. But number two, it becomes extremely resilient to stains, to pitting, to rust, things like that. The next difference is, as you can probably tell when I did that, this has this beautiful hammered finish on it, which serves two purposes. One is aesthetics, and the second is stopping vacuums from being formed while you're cutting, which means that things aren't going to stick to this knife because there are always air pockets. If you've ever cut a tomato with a flat knife like this and it got stuck to it, or you're cutting garlic and all of a sudden you have all this garlic just sticking to your blade, you've experienced that. This stops that from happening. Finally, a very, very big difference that sort of makes it a deal breaker for me and is the reason that I always suggest Shun knives to pretty much anyone who is trying to get a knife set, unless there are reasons for them not to get Shun, is that all Shuns come with free lifetime sharpening, which adds up very, very quickly because on a knife like this, which is not serrated, if you send it to a reputable sharpener, it would cost you about $5 per inch of the knife to sharpen it, which means that for an 8-inch chef's knife, like either of these two, it would cost you $40. That makes the price difference a little bit less between these two, but again, they're still in two different classes. If you want a piece of art that also happens to cut very, very, very well, this is the knife that I would suggest. If you're looking for a workhorse, would I suggest this? I would only suggest this if you are actually working in a place where your knives get crazy, crazy abused, like a very, very, very busy restaurant kitchen where you're throwing knives into dishwashers, etc., etc. If you're not doing that, I would highly suggest getting the Shun Sora because it has pretty much all of these benefits that I've mentioned here, a full tang, it has VG10 steel, it's clad in stainless steel, though not 32 layers of it, etc. But it also comes with free sharpening. So the price difference between this and the Sora is moot because of that free sharpening that I mentioned. So the only time that I would suggest, again, getting this knife is if you're really, really abusing your knives for some reason or another. If you guys have any questions, let me know. If you have any comments or concerns, let me know, and I will talk to you very soon. Two completely different classes of knives, but like I said, a lot of people have asked me to do reviews comparing the Victorinox to the higher end knives so they can make a decision. So that's what I'm doing. Shun Premier versus Victorinox Fibrox, both 8-inch chef's knives. And off the bat, you can tell this is definitely a Premier knife.